Throughout my opening, I conform to many conventions of the comedy genre. This is done through the use of deliberate diegetic and non-diegetic sound, cinematography, mise-en-scène, editing, and primarily performance. However, these conventions are less obvious at the very beginning of my opening. The first several establishing shots are simply of my protagonist Colin, deep in thought on a park bench. Through the lack of music and non-diegetic sound, as well as the actor's serious facial expressions, the tone emitted resembles that of a drama. However, this is soon subverted when he receives a sudden phone call. In a state of panic, he mouths a curse word under his breath and begins to sprint away. These exaggerated movements are very typical of the comedy genre, which is also further reinforced by the non-diegetic song that plays as he runs. The song I used was I Can't Turn You Loose by the Blues Brothers, which carries a very upbeat tempo and carefree nature. Again, conventions that are prevalent within the comedy genre. This edit here helps introduce our central character, and with the use of freeze frame, it conforms to typical comedy conventions. The editing in my opening is mostly continuity editing, meaning it appears seamless and therefore plays into the naturalistic atmosphere which most comedy films thrive on. This is a very important convention when it comes to comedy, as it allows for audiences to see funny shenanigans and jokes within a setting that is relatable to them. However, there is one moment in my opening where the editing is slightly jarring and not seamless, which comes through the use of jump cuts, something that is usually meant to disorient the viewer, but in this case, it simply highlights the duration of my character's journey to his mother's house. Since my protagonist is dressed smartly and attains a bouquet of bright pink flowers, it could be interpreted that the film is going to be a rom-com through my use of mise-en-scène, with the flowers symbolizing a romantic kind of love. My opening has all the components of a rom-com, especially with the fact that the man is running and another woman can be heard through the voiceover. But this idea of romantic love is completely subverted at the end when Colin says, "Happy Mother's Day." This in itself is comedic, as it paints our main character as a sort of loser, which is a trope that comedy films often begin with, before the protagonist undergoes a sort of character arc. An example of this could be the 2007 film Superbad, where both main characters start as losers, navigating their way through high school, looking to attract women. In the case of my opening, you would expect that finding a girlfriend would be easier for Colin because of his decent looks, but the fact that the only relationship we are shown of Colin is through his imagination leads us to believe that there is something in his character that prevents him from finding love. This also sets up the narrative for the rest of the film, as we want to learn more about his personality. According to Steve Neal's theory, genre must include instances of repetition and difference. In other words, a film should be recognizable as a comedy because of certain conventions, but it should also have different features to keep things fresh and less predictable. I think my opening manages to achieve this by not completely honing in on the goofy and over-the-top senselessness that can sometimes permeate the comedy genre. In terms of technical coding, my opening title sequence conforms to the natural structure, with the name of my film appearing first, and then concluding with the name of the director. The font I used was reminiscent of the comedy genre, with its bold outline and sort of goofy-looking aesthetic. Because Colin is in his early 20s, he represents both youth and adulthood. Through mise-en-scène and overall appearance, Colin's respectable attire, stylish gold watch, and well-kept hair all conform to the notion of young men being competent and somewhat suave. However, this representation is challenged, as we learn through the mother's voiceovers that Colin is often late and not able to take responsibility, highlighting his inability to cope with the tasks of adulthood. I tried to construct the character in a way that wasn't purely one-dimensional, where he wasn't the completely charming and charismatic type, but also not a complete loser. A lot of times, these tropes and portrayals of social groups are extremely exaggerated. For example, the archetype of a mama's boy often has very derogatory and irredeemable qualities, which is another trope that I have tried to subvert in my opening. We understand that Colin is dependent on his mother, and unable to strike up any romantic kind of relationships. Therefore, he could be interpreted as a mama's boy. However, he is not the typical representation because he isn't unkept, lazy, demanding, or a total softy. With more nuance in his personality, I was able to challenge representations, and let the humor not solely be based upon played-out character tropes.